The sort of danger of looking at language is that the properties of language, it's not really designed for conveying the truth, capturing the reality of your experience. The fundamental function for language is to persuade people.
So you are always lying when you speak?
Well, let's put it this way. You're always not telling the whole truth.
I'm here with Nick Enfield. Who are you, Mr. Nick?
So I'm Nick Enfield. I am a professor of linguistics in Sydney, Australia at the University of Sydney.
Tell me more about you. How old are you?
Sure, of course. Yeah. So, I teach linguistics. I study linguistics and a lot of other aspects of scholarship that are connected. So anthropology, psychology, these fields are all connected, and I have been very lucky to be trained by some pretty interesting people over the years. So nowadays I'm in a linguistics department. Previously I was in something called the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics in the Netherlands, which is an institute for the psychology of language, and that got me into many different fields, not just the sort of classical linguistics, but other fields. And so, my background is really that I originally came from Australia, where I live now, and grew up in Canberra, studied undergraduate degree at Australian National University in Canberra. I did my postgraduate research in Melbourne, and now based in Sydney. And I live here with my family, my wife and two kids. They're on vacation right now. They're just in sort of third grade and fifth grade. So I'm going back and forth between taking care of them and doing my work.
So they are in vacation now. So you are in vacation as well because you have a vacation from them?
Not really. So I've been spending my time with them, and we have a vacation together. So we've been going out, doing some fun stuff together, and right now they're just chilling at home, and I come in to talk to you.
Cool. So you know what captured my attention from your work is the book that you wrote about the language is good for lawyers. What's the title of the book? But bad for scientists?
That's right. Yeah, the book is called Language versus Reality, and the subtitle is Language is Good for Lawyers and Bad for Scientists. So that book was published with MIT Press in 2022.
So tell me more. Why language is good for lawyers and bad for scientists?
Yeah, so language is something that we're surrounded with. We're all using it. We listen to a podcast, though. It's just language, words. You pick up a book, you look at a website, we're flooded with language. And often we don't really notice language because we're like the fish that swim in the water, and we don't know what is water. And so linguists try to pay attention to this water of language that we swim in. And the sort of danger of looking at language is that you think, or let's say everyday people, they don't see it. So they don't think that it is influencing them. They think it's a kind of it's just like breathing or something. Now, in my work, I've been looking for a long time at how language affects the way you think, how language affects the way that you make decisions and the way you behave. And the book is just really explaining how, because of the properties of language, it's not really designed for conveying the truth. It's not really designed for capturing the reality of your experience. It can do that, but really the fundamental function for language is to persuade people. That's what it's really evolved for. That's what we really use it for, is to persuade people of whatever it is we're trying to do. So basically social life is really all about influencing people around us. And sometimes that is a kind of influence that they are happy with because we're cooperating or because we have the same goals. Sometimes we're influencing them against their own interests. But when we use language, we're always putting some kind of perspective and trying to justify or influence people And that's what lawyers do. Lawyers' job is to, the truth is maybe important, but more important, I am representing my client, and I want to get you to see things my way, and I want you to come to the decision that I would like you to come to. And language has all these properties that allow us to frame what we're talking about in a particular way, and that's the fundamental character of language is that it's all about framing and influence. So that makes it good for lawyers, and it also makes it difficult for scientists if scientists are really concerned with just cutting through the social influence and getting to the truth. And if your interest is really getting to the truth, then it's quite hard to be very objective with language because it is such a subjective medium.
So scientists don't have easy time to use language to convey the truth. Is it possible to convey the truth? How do you convey the truth with language?
Sure. So it certainly is possible to convey the truth with language. But of course, you have to be careful about what you're claiming. So if I say, well, you are wearing a black T-shirt, I talk to my kids later and I say, yeah, Phidias was wearing a black T-shirt. That's true, I think, right? I see it. I believe my eyes. I have language that can help me to describe that. And I'm relying on the word black to convey that information. But the problem is if your T-shirt was just a little bit lighter, maybe dark gray, probably in English I would say, he's wearing a gray T-shirt. But a lot of languages don't have the same vocabulary for talking about color. English is obviously not the only language, and there are thousands of languages, and they have very different distinctions. So if I say in another language...
Are you sure there is many more languages than English?
Yeah, English is taking over, but it's not at all taking over. There are thousands of languages, as you know. If I was going to tell somebody about your shirt in another language, I might use a word which means not black, but something like a dark color, or which would include the dark gray. So if I'm not showing the color to somebody, but just using words, then what happens is language can strip away some of the detailed information. So every color is a slightly different shade. And if I try to describe it using language, I have to rely on just this small number of categories. So in my book, I talk about the human ability in vision to see many, many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of fine differences in color. But we have very small vocabulary, just a few dozen words or maybe even a few words to talk about it. So when I say, you ask me, can I tell the truth? Well, I can tell enough information that is useful probably for our interaction. But if I want to be very precise, if I want to capture exactly my whole experience, then that's quite hard to do with language. And that's why, obviously, in science, we have special vocabulary, we use diagrams, we illustrate the facts, we use mathematics. And so, of course, we can communicate about truth and reality, but we are always forced to use natural human language, which is very kind of biased. So I don't want to say that scientists have an impossible time, but scientists are humans and we use language, and this makes us quite a bit more subjective or biased than we would like to think that a scientist would be.
So you are claiming that we don't need to say the truth to convey a message.
Well, I think that's right, but you need to explain what you mean by convey a message. So in my view, and in the view that I describe in the book, language is a form of animal communication. So humans are one kind of animal. Language is, of course, very special and very different to the kinds of communication forms that other animals have. But there's also a lot in common because it is built on a similar biological basis. And if you look at communication generally, if you ask, well, what is communication for? What we find when we look in the animal world is it's really for influencing others. So you're trying to scare another individual, or you're trying to attract them, or you're trying to signal that you are a friend, or many sort of functions that you have. But what you're doing often is not just passing information, but trying to get them to act in a certain way, to stop attacking you, or to come to you, or to mate with you, or whatever the function is. So that is the basic biological foundation that language is built on. So what we use it for is really for influencing others. Very simple things. So, for example, you ask somebody to pass you the salt. You're having breakfast. Pass me the salt. You're not conveying information or trying to establish the truth. You're actually getting them to act in a certain way. You're influencing their behavior. And many of the things that we do with language can be seen that way. So if you tell a joke, if you tell a story of what happened today, if you gossip, what you're doing is not just exchanging information, but you are bringing other people into to be closer to you. You're forming associations. We do a lot of things with language that is what we would call micro-political rather than scientific in terms of establishing the facts.
So you are claiming that the reason language evolved is because it makes it easy to persuade others, to argue with others.
Yeah, basically that's correct. So this is not my original claim. So in my book, what I do is I talk about many of the things that we know about language from scientific research, which helps us to understand how this works. But other researchers before me, an example would be Robin Dunbar, who started out studying monkeys, other primates' communication. And he pointed out that if you actually look at the way humans use language, sure, we use it for sending news and updating people, but most of the time we're doing things like gossiping, which involves passing information on, that's for sure, but really the function of it is to push some people away and bring some people close. It's a kind of a way of affiliating and forming groups and making sure that those groups are cohesive, and you create some glue with those groups because you find out through language what you think about other things that are going on in your social world. So let's say you and me are living in the same village, and somebody on the other side of the village did something. If we gossip about them and we both can use the language to show that we agree this is a terrible person, or this person did something they shouldn't have done, or whatever, it brings you and me closer. And it forms a sort of an affiliation or a coalition that with animals, they will do that kind of thing in other sorts of ways, not through passing information, but through spending more time together or whatever the case may be. So that basic function of language doesn't go away. Even if we are scientists, journalists, judges, of course, we're interested in establishing the truth through language, but we are always working within this kind of a biological frame that is animal communication, and language must fit inside that and operate through that.
So I heard this theory before that you're describing, and I was so surprised and so interested by it. And I was like, oh, wow. So I can use this when I talk when I think on my own brain about stuff. A lot of times the thoughts are not less lower quality, but I come up with better ideas when I argue with people. or when I discuss about ideas with people. And because if you are correct in what you are claiming, this is naturally why language evolved, for us to be more productive by talking.
Yeah, well, I think that is a very important function. It might be a separate function because, the way that language works is we like to think sometimes that it is just a kind of calculator for thinking. So some ideas about language suggest that language is really just good for thinking and reasoning, and then we can use it for other things. But as you just pointed out, actually language helps us much more, not just inside our head, but when there is a dialogue going back and forth. And I agree very strongly with that. I think that it illustrates this view that says if you want to if you want to make an improvement in what you think, if you want to come to conclusions that are better quality, then what you have to do is to subject your own thinking to criticism. You have to critique yourself. You have to find alternative ways of thinking. And you can only really do that through dialogue. So you have to talk to people who will give you alternative viewpoint. No, that's not right for these reasons. And maybe you can defend your position, but the best thing is if you try very hard to attack your own position, and maybe you can improve from that. And language gives you a tool for doing that.
But the thing is difficult to attack your own position when you are alone. You need to reason. You need to talk to do that.
I agree completely, yes. And I think because it is a very difficult skill, some people are good at self-criticism, but most people are not very good at it. So language, it allows you to go out and find those opportunities to subject your own thinking to criticism. I should say, though, I think that's a very sort of modern function of language. I think that if you are spending time in a small sort of social group, you're not working on scientific questions, you probably don't want or need to challenge your own thinking that often. But if you are working on a puzzle, if you're trying to make an advance, then I think it's really important. And language allows us to, through talking to people, allows us to make advances in thinking that would not be possible.
I will give you an example in my life that I was shocked by it. So I'm a YouTuber. I get let's say millions of views on the videos that I upload on entertainment. And a lot of times when I sit down and come up, let's say, for ideas to make a video and what it will be inside, how the structure will be, so people are interested to watch until the end, and we hook them and for them to not leave the video. I come up, when I sit down and I write, I come up with, let's say, half quality of the stuff that if I have two other people to just speak and fight about those, because they throw ideas, they challenge my own ideas, and it's like in the same time, it becomes double the productivity of the task, which is amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's incredible. I think the mechanism is really quite ingenious. So normally when we're thinking by ourselves, we suffer from these biases. We have this bias in particular called confirmation bias. And that bias makes us look for reasons to do the thing that we wanted to do. So we have an idea, like you come up with an idea, and all you're interested, you find, here's why that's a good idea. Here's why that's a good idea. Here's why that's a good idea. And you need someone. We are naturally biased towards thinking that way, and it's actually very difficult to find to find reasons not to do the thing that we already want to do. So that's why we need people who want to help us by criticizing us. It's a very particular kind of game, if you like, where you need to have that openness with people that they can convince you, no, that's not very good reason. That's not a very good idea, and here's why. And you can see, I didn't think of that. So it really requires cooperation between the people who are involved. That's a really important piece about it. and it requires a kind of unusual, quite human type of trait, which is allowing yourself to be criticized. So sometimes I think about it like going to the dentist. If you go to the dentist, it's this kind of crazy thing, right? You lie back and you just let this stranger put this very dangerous things right inside your mouth, right? Crazy. Like no animal would let you do something like that, right? I mean, maybe if it's your own dog or something, they would let you do something like that. But it's a very strange thing but we are capable of thinking, okay, this is actually good for me. I will let someone sort of do this dangerous thing to me. And I think about a conversation a little bit like that sometimes, of the kind you're describing, which is, I'm going to let you critique. I'm just going to, let's see where this goes. Even if it causes me pain, I know that it's going to benefit me. And language is the tool for letting that happen.
So I have a stupid question for you. Why language is important?
I don't think that's a stupid question. I think it's a very good sort of basic question to ask about a language, which probably many linguists don't stop to ask. I mean, maybe we think it's obvious. So I suppose an obvious answer is that everything that humans are able to do, which is an amazing amount of incredible stuff, would not be possible without language. It just would not. So if you look at, anything you can list that is incredible about our lives and about the world that we live in. So just take, forms of artistic expression, the kind of, music that you love, the YouTubers, your channel. Think about technology, the stuff we are using now, this technology to connect with each other across the planet, the medicines that we take, so many things that we take for granted about our life have a very deep history in human cooperation and in passing on knowledge through generations. And that cooperation and that knowledge transfer would be impossible without language. So there's no other animal on the planet that has technology anything like what humans have. There's a few small examples of, chimpanzees will use a stick in a certain way to get ants out of a hole, and birds would do similar things. But you don't build and build and build. Just get in your car and drive down the street. The amount of the millions of hours and the lives that have gone into developing all of that tech, that makes our world sort of a lot more comfortable and interesting. It wouldn't not be possible with language. So that's one answer, is that language provides.
So basically, to summarize what you said that because of language, we are able to take over from all the other species and have what we have.
Well, yes, but I wouldn't. I mean, it doesn't sound so nice if you put it in that way, because you could say, well, maybe the world would be better if we didn't have language, because then we wouldn't be making certain animals go extinct, and we wouldn't be polluting the planet and creating climate change. And, you could say, well, maybe the world would be better if we never developed language. That would be one kind of answer. But I think, you can focus on the bad if you want, but also the good, that all of the incredible kind of richness of human cultural existence today, and the possibility of, I mentioned things like, medicines for treating sickness, and all of the kind of social values that we have, and the kindness that we experience, and all of that is part of what we've built through language. So let's just say that whether language has had good outcomes or bad outcomes, it's important, because that's the question, that's the word you used in your question. Why is it important? It's important because it...
Oh, you are a linguist. You.
Yeah, why is it important? It's important because it is really vital to what makes humans human. So if there's bad things about humans, it's probably got to do with language. If there's good things about humans, it's probably got to do with language. In the sense that, I don't mean in a very direct sense. So like rockets and bombs are very human things. And of course, they're not built out of language, but they couldn't have been built without language. That's my point. So the good and the bad about humanity depends on language. And in that sense, that's why language is so vital to what it means to be human. And if you could take it away overnight, if you were God and you say, I'm going to just make everyone not know language at all and not be able to invent it, well, that would be the end.
So are you ready for another stupid question?
Yeah, sure. I like these questions. They're not stupid.
So what is language?
Well, what is language? I think there's a fairly simple answer is probably the best one, which is that language is a system of communication that has words and rules for combining those words into sentences. And I think that's it. So if you look at other animals, they don't have words. They don't have rules for combining them into sentences. If you look at any human language, let's say 6,000 or 7,000 languages in the world today, they have very different sounding words, but they all have words, and they have different.
This is not language. If I do this too,
I personally think that is language, because I basically think that's a substitute for words. It's what some people have studied these things quite a lot, and there are different types of gestures that we use. So this type of one that you just did is a particular. There's a family of gestures, okay sign and peace sign and middle finger up and thumbs up. These are basically replacements.
So the middle finger is real in Australia as well, right?
Yes, yeah, very offensive. It's very powerful. And in terms of influencing other people, you can make people punch you if you do that, right? So that I think is very much like language, in that it kind of, like that middle finger up. You could also just say, F you or something like that. And it's like a replacement for words. But there are other kinds of gestures which are not really replacements for words, that they accompany words. So you might be talking about, the angle of a road that you went up in your car, and you can adjust with your hand this angle very subtly in a way that you can't capture it exactly with words. So those type of gestures don't replace words, but what's important is that they're part of the process of speaking. And animals don't have those kinds of gestures. They don't have pointing gestures that they use. There's some simple examples, but nothing like, humans are very dependent on pointing. We point at this and that, and we use these gestures. So I think that it's a very good point you make, that what about gesture? Well, it's part of the broader system. But if you want to just have a basic definition, language is a way of communicating that uses words and rules for combining those words into sentences.
Okay, so do you not want to know? There is two real reasons why you are here today. Do you want to know the first one?
Sure, I'm quite curious.
Cool. So I've been following to understand. Noam Chomsky is one of the best linguistics in the world. Quite old, but this is what people say, that he's the best linguist. And I studied that he says that recursion in language, so the ability to say, yesterday I ate with John, and like build with stories upon stories inside stories and stuff, whatever. And they say that's the most fundamental thing this is what he's claiming, that this is the more when you don't have recursion, you don't have language, as I understand things. And I want you to explain me why this is, and if you agree or disagree, and what does because in my brain it doesn't seem fundamental. Like why it needs to have retention.
Recursion.
Like I can do very basic stuff that doesn't have retention and still language. Right. So
okay, so a bit of background. I mean, you said Noam Chomsky is regarded as the best linguist. I don't think that everybody agrees with that statement. I think that everyone would agree he is probably the most famous linguist. Whether he's the best is another question. So he's obviously an incredibly smart person who's achieved an enormous amount. He's made a lot of unbelievable impact in his field. You know, he's probably more people have cited his work than anybody else alive. His impact has been massive, but his work in linguistics is very narrow. So a lot of people have studied linguistics or languages generally for hundreds of years, and his idea of what language is, it's a very, very narrow set of all of the things that you might be interested in about language. And you pointed out that he's interested in this idea of recursion. So that is a very kind of mathematical, informational, technical aspect of language. And it's true that recursion is quite unusual, and it's something that languages do. So you gave the example of, let me just give you an example. So I can say, you know, John went to the market. It's a very simple little sentence. And then I can put this sentence inside another one. So Mary said John went to the market. And then recursion means you can take the output and then put it in again to the same. So Bill believed Mary said John went to the market. Okay, and Jane thought Bill believed Mary said John went to the market. So actually, quite quickly, it's hard to remember, hard to process.
And there is a joke that someone said to me that the biggest phrase in the world is like a big book, and then it's easily the record of the biggest phrase in the world that with recursion, and it's easily passed the record because the next person is using John said and everything that was said in the book. Exactly. And it's so funny.
Exactly. So it's the point though is that it's infinite. So you cannot, recursion is an infinite operation. But in reality, when we use language, nobody's ever going to be able to say an infinitely long sentence. You die before you get to the end. So obviously Chomsky knows that, and he's pointing out that this is an underlying possibility that language creates, and the reality of life means that most of our sentences are quite short. Now, I agree with Chomsky that recursion is important for many languages, and however, a lot of linguists have said, well, it's not really needed for language. There are a number of ways in which you can, have a very rich language without having these recursive operations. You just imply things. You don't have to kind of make them explicit in the language. So I think that this idea is sort of not everyone agrees with Chomsky, and it doesn't really seem to matter that much for a lot of the work that people do. I guess what I would want to emphasize is that the recursion issue is one small thing. There's a million other things that are interesting about language, which Chomsky's very sort of narrow view of interest, it just doesn't cover. So I started out talking to you about how language is a form of cooperation, it's a form of influence, and it gives humans a framework for social interaction, which is very kind of unique, right? So when we talk to each other, we're actually in a cooperative, it's a form of cooperation. It's like playing a game together. We make a commitment. And so there's one argument says, wait, recursion is not what's important or unique about language. What's unique is this possibility of making a joint commitment and using language to create cooperation of a certain kind. And I won't go into it all now. There's a lot of interesting research and scholarship around what that actually is. The point is that there are alternative ideas around what is unique and centrally important about language than just recursion. So recursion is very informational, but my argument, like many other people, is actually no. What's really fundamentally important about language is social and interactional. So that would be sort of my basic first reaction to the Chomsky point of view.
So recursion is not the most fundamental important thing, like it's painted sometimes.
Not for me, no. I mean, I think it's overrated, basically. It's interesting, it's important, but I think it is far from the most important thing in language. I think that, and the reason is because, some people have demonstrated, you don't really need it for language, or at least you don't need to rely on it very much for language to be productive. And also then there are other things that are surely as important, if not more important, as I just mentioned. So I think it's the emphasis on recursion is too much.
So I will tell you the other reason later.
Okay.
So for now, I want to ask you. So you study language. Does that help you speak better and articulate yourself better and maybe win some arguments or persuade some people easier?
No, not really, although you would think it should. So I thought you were going to ask, does it make you better at speaking other languages? And I think that the answer to that is probably yes, because when we study language, the sort of basic things that you study in linguistics is things like how do you move your mouth to create different sounds from languages, and how do you change your accent, what kinds of different grammar can you have in different languages. These things sort of opens up your mind a little bit to the possibilities of language, and it means that it's usually a bit easier to learn a different language from your own native language. But then you asked about, are you better at winning arguments? And I think that probably, if you study linguistics today, it's not, winning arguments is something more like what used to be called rhetoric. The classical forms of persuasion, and
but
probably
don't take it only on the winning arguments. There is more to it, like for you to be able to teach your students better. There is a lot of ways that you use. Like my question is, does that have any effect to your personal life or to your life that you become better in these things? Because everything is language that you describe. So if you know how this thing works, maybe you can manipulate it a bit and be more efficient with it or something.
Yeah, I think so. So I think that in general, first thing I want to say is it's not guaranteed. So if your listeners are thinking, oh, great, I'm going to go do linguistics and become more persuasive, you might be disappointed, because often linguistics degrees will focus on things like, phonetics and syntax. I love these subjects for sure, but they're not really about things like persuasion. But in my book, Language versus Reality, that you mentioned earlier, I do make the case there that if you learn a lot about how different languages can influence you and influence other people, then you should be able to become more mindful of that power that language has. So you become more conscious and more mindful about how you use language. So at the end of the book, I talk about the kind of the potential of learning about the power of language for more, partly for sort of more effective speaking, but also for more ethical speaking in some sense. So for sort of, thinking about the impact that you have on other people through the choice of words that you make. So we always have to choose a certain way to describe this situation. We usually don't think very much about it, but if we study the way that language works, you start to realize, that way of describing the situation will make people will put this in a bad light or a good light. So, classic example, it would be something like talking about the terrorists versus talking about the freedom fighters. Same people, but you have two different sort of framings for that. Now, that's a very extreme example, but every day when we're talking, we have to choose one word instead of over other words. And if you become more conscious of how the choices of words that you're making, then I think, yes, that does make you a better communicator. And a better communicator means more effective at persuading others. That's in a way good for you, not necessarily good for them, but also a more ethical language.
But if you are a good person and good teacher, then it's good for them as well.
Exactly. And that's the win-win, that's win-win because, and most of life is about cooperation. Most of, of course people compete and deceive each other, but I don't think that's the majority of what happens in our day. I think most of the day we're with people who have similar goals to us. We're cooperating with people. So the way that we influence them is usually helping them.
So indeed, it helped you become more careful with your words.
Yeah, I think so.
Understand the power of it and therefore be able to persuade others better.
Absolutely. And I think it's just worth thinking about what a powerful thing language is. So, you look at things like, cars, right? So, there are cars everywhere. They're very powerful. They're very dangerous. And so the government, regulates them and says, you have to learn all this stuff about cars. You have to learn how to drive them. You have to learn the rules. And only then will we give you, a license you can drive. And when I had kids, I remember someone saying, they do that for cars, but they let any old person have a kid. You don't have to get a license to have a kid. You can just be a complete idiot and have a kid. And I think in a way, language is similar, right? You can any person speaks. You can't stop people from using language. And in a way, I'm not advocating, getting a license to use language. But what I mean is that it's a powerful thing, and we should voluntarily take an interest in that power and ask ourselves, how can I use this quite powerful device best?
So I watching on myself on this podcast sometimes and speaking with other people, I understood how bad I am in expressing myself. So you think this is natural things? You think I can improve on this? You think is if I'm more cautious like with the language, like how should I go about it? And other people that they have the same problem with me.
Sure. Yeah. So I wrote a book in 2017 called How We Talk, and it was about conversation and how the sort of structure of conversation works. And one of the things I focus on in that book is what I call traffic signals of conversation. And that's things like when we say and and when we have, we're not fluent with our speech. And a lot of interviewers were very interested in this question because, you go online and there's always these articles that say, how do I stop saying and I want to be more fluent? And my view is that you can get rid of that disfluency. One way to do that is to know what you want to say. I mean, that's basically a sign. When you start using these words, you are indicating that you don't know what you want to say yet. I mean, it's more complicated than that. But if, for example, what you just described about your own expression, I think, and also just, watching you in the last half hour, it's not about a problem with language. It's the fact that you are actually actively thinking about what you want to say. So that active thought is actually coming out in what we might think of as being disfluency or sort of not fluent speech, right? But we all have that experience when we are exploring what it is that we want to say and we're not quite there yet. So if you want to get rid of that, that's basically only going to be possible in a context where you can really prepare beforehand for exactly what you want to say.
But that's a bit boring, right?
Yes, it's a bit boring, exactly. So, I think that I value, that sort of disfluency in the right context. And I think one of those contexts is exactly, when you've got conversation that is spontaneous and you're exploring something that you haven't even thought about before. And so not being 100% fluent is actually a good indication that you're still kind of exploring those ideas. And I think it's also a matter of style. So people, when we see ourselves talking, I have the same experience. I do an interview, I listen, I have these phrases I repeat and I don't like it, but
you are amazing in explaining stuff. If I am 2, you are 10.
Well, when I hear other people, though, I don't mind it at all. I don't mind the sort of disfluency and so on, because I think that it's an indication that they are thinking, And so this is the experience I have listening to you, and for that reason, I would say, it's nothing to worry about.
Okay, that's comforting coming from a linguist. So I want to ask about, when do you think language start emerging in this world? What time? 3,000 years, 300,000 years, million years, and what is the science that we had?
So the evolution of language in our species, that's something that is very controversial. So, back in the old days, there was a famous situation in the French Linguistic Society. They said, we're going to ban any papers that are speculate about the original evolution of human language, because it's just speculation. We can never know. It's not scientific question. We don't let you talk about that. And nowadays that's changed completely because, evolutionary science is incredibly advanced. There's a lot of wonderful new methods, a lot of new ways of modeling and computing the possibilities. There's new data from the fossil record, and it's actually a very rich field now, evolutionary linguistics, and it's been going strong. So that doesn't mean that there is an agreement among experts in this field. So I'm not doing research on the original evolution of human language myself. But there's a consensus that probably language emerged around about 100 to 200,000 years ago. And some people say much less, like 50,000. Some people say much more. But, rough sort of average of the kinds of time period people say it's going to be a couple of 100,000 years. And, of course, it's very hard to answer the question because there are no fossils. We cannot tell what, there are fossils of things like people's bones and maybe the objects that they're making and leave behind in campsites, but you cannot get fossils of human behavior. So I don't really have a personal view on how long ago I think language emerged, but it's certainly, I'm sure that at least 100,000 is going to be right because, you have people traveling all around the world from around that time who, evidently have all brought languages with them. Now, we don't really know the deep history of languages. We can compare modern languages and understand how they are related, but that can only go back a few thousand years. So we really don't know anything about what the languages were like in the world if you go back 20 or 30 or 50,000 years. We assume that there was language. We just don't really know what it was like. The very interesting questions of what the first languages must have been like, and there are people speculating about that. So exactly, some people say that it's a gesture started that off. I think that that's quite possible, and I think that in my work, what I've been focused on a lot is the fact that language is a form of action. So we started out talking about how language is a way of influencing others. And if you look at how we influence others without language, we might be, reaching towards them. We might be, putting our body in a certain direction that show them we're going to go towards them or we're going to go away from them. The sort of signals that we give, those are the same kinds of signals that animals can give. And so I believe that language has to kind of have emerged on the basis of the actions that we perform when we're interacting with others. And so gestures could naturally emerge in a context like that. And once you have gestures, it's a complicated path, but certainly many people have argued that from gestures of some kind early on, then language could evolve. But clearly it takes a very long time.
I'm a bit confused. So you said action is a form of language?
No, language is a form of action. What I mean is that
that's for me it's the same thing, but for a linguist, no.
No, I mean, actually, there are all sorts of different actions, right? So if I take a rock and I break another rock, that's not language. It is action, but it's not language. But there are kinds of actions that I perform on other people. So let's just say, for example, let's say you and me were in a room together. And I want you
in
to
a virtual room.
Yeah, virtual room. No, let's make it a real room. Let's pretend that we're in a room together. And I want you to be outside the room.
But let's put it that we're in Cyprus. Do you know where Cyprus is? The room?
Yes, I do know Cyprus. Yeah,
let's say that we're in Cyprus.
Okay, let's say we're in Cyprus and we're inside a room, and I want you to go out of the room for whatever reason. There are two ways I can do that. Right? One is I can push you out if I'm strong enough. I think, you are a strong young man. You probably push me back. But, I can push you out is one way to do it. And that would be an action. I'm physically acting on your body to get you out. Another way to do it, which would be much more the usual human way to do it, is could you please leave the room? And you can describe that as I just make some sounds from my mouth, right? You understand these words, but if you're a Martian and you come down to Earth to observe Earth creatures, I just make a noise and then you go out by yourself, like a kind of magic. I don't have to push you, you just go out. And we see the equivalence of language to a physical action. So when I do things like I ask you to leave and then you leave, what I've done with my language is I acted on you and made you do something.
Did the pushing is language as well?
I'm sorry?
Does the pushing me out of the room is language?
The pushing is absolutely not language, no, because that's just physical force. That there's no, you don't need to put it this way.
I'm trying to communicate something with pushing you. Am I not?
But maybe you're asleep and I could just push you out while you're asleep. I'm not communicating with you. I'm just trying to remove you. It's a physical action. But with language, the really important difference is this. If I push you out, whether you're asleep, alive, dead, whether you speak another language or not, doesn't matter. I get you out just for physical force. If I try to get you out using language, you have to be paying attention to me. You have to know the language. So if I speak to you in some language you don't understand, it's not going to work, right? So you need to actually recognize my action. And then you can respond in the correct way. So that's this very deep dependence on a social convention, right? That's what language is. That's why languages are different everywhere we go. I have to rely on you understanding what the connection is. So your compliance or the effect of getting you out comes through your understanding. Whereas if I push you with my hand, you don't have to understand that. Your body gets pushed out. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, and it's kind of very funny and beautiful when you put it that way, that an alien is watching from above. It seems like magic. The language seems like magic. So
that's right. And that's the reason why I see language as a form of action, because, if you just observe directly what people are doing with language, is that we're making these noises or these physical actions, visible things, sign language or whatever, but you respond in very particular ways, and also you respond very quickly. So I'm actually influencing you every moment through my language, and that's why I call it action.
So I want to ask you the billion-dollar question. So why not it's not the question why you are here, but
right,
so
right.
what is the difference between people that they shake the word with their language and the people that they don't get anyone to act on what they're saying? So, for example, Elon Musk played a big role in my development as a human because of, I don't know, the power of the language that he's using, probably. So, what it makes, is it the language itself? Is it the things that other person did in his life? Is it the power that he's communicating, the alpha male thing? Like, what makes someone more convincing than the other?
Yeah, that's a very deep question, and I think a very complex one. I would say language is certainly not the only thing that's going to be part of that. I mean, but we can say language plays a role. So language is very...
Maybe language is the vehicle that is doing that. So maybe it doesn't... let's say is the thing that it has. I'm stupid. Sorry for I tried to answer, but I had this idea. It's like a train having wagons, whatever, with gold. Then maybe it has wood or has something. Is the vehicle language, and then what is inside is a different thing. I don't know. Like what?
I'm not sure. I mean, in the case of somebody who's very influential, like Elon Musk or whoever it is, I mean, I think that language, you don't want to put too much...
Or Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh. You don't want to put too much emphasis on language in the sense that, it's not like they have some magical ability with language that can convince anybody of anything. I think that they might have some special skills with language. I'm not sure that Elon Musk really does. I mean, he's obviously very interesting and very influential, and I'm not sure it's because I don't really hear him doing anything very special with language, although I haven't studied it directly. It's an interesting kind of question. But I think you should also look at not just how he uses language, but how everybody talks about him. And so so language plays a role, but not necessarily through his mouth. So other people saying things like, well, just how much do people talk about him, which is a lot, right?
I talked about it now.
Yeah, you just brought it up. Here we are talking about Elon Musk and a million other people on the planet, a billion probably saying his name every day. So people, there is an effect in social life that we want to... we need to focus on similar things to create common ground and to create common attention. So what you find is there is a kind of there's a principle called a rich get richer principle, which is kind of ironic with Elon Musk here, but it means that if you start talking about one thing, then everybody starts talking about that thing, and it attracts all the attention. It's the same with music. It's the same with movies. Someone's got to be right up here on the top, and everyone else is like right down here. And there's always got to be some very big, all the attention is going, it's Taylor Swift, it's Elon Musk, it's Brad Pitt, whoever the sort of, you're a YouTuber, you're trying to break through to that top, that very small kind of window. And how do you do that? Well, it's these sort of network effects that create that. So part of the answer, I think, is that it's kind of luck. There's got to be a lot of luck involved in how somebody like Elon Musk has got to that position. But obviously there's more than that. It's not just luck, so Taylor Swift is a good singer. You're a great YouTuber. Musk is a great, innovator, CEO, what have you. So his achievements are another piece of it. So, he's done special things that other people can't do. And, you can talk about them in different ways, and people do talk about them in different ways. But coming now back to your question, maybe there are
by the way, I find very, very interesting what you're saying now, that other people are using the right language to describe him, not necessarily him always.
Yeah. So you get this discourse, this circulation going, and then you get a sort of a contest or a competition about what is the right way to talk or to describe what he does. So if you go into the newspapers and you look at how do people talk about Elon Musk, some people say the word genius. Some people say visionary. And other people say, crazy person,
asshole,
school child, asshole, all these, terms that are very negative, but they're very typical kind of. Going back to our original kind of question, are we using language to convey the truth or just to try to influence people to my point of view? So if I want to say he's a genius, what I'm trying to do is to elevate some features of this complex person and hide some other features. And if you say, he's an asshole, well, you're elevating different features and hiding other features, and you're using language to do that.
So you are always lying when you speak.
Well, let's put it this way. You're always not telling the whole truth. I don't think you're always lying, but
I love, yes, the differentiations that you make, they're so interesting and fun. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, so when you get into court and they say you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So that means that, I'm not going to tell any lies, but I can leave out important information. And in the court, they say, no, you can't do that. And I think that's what we're always doing with language. We're always leaving out important information. It's different from lying. And in fact, it's unavoidable. But it comes back to our sort of this ethical question. What should I leave out? What is okay to leave out? What do I want to put in the foreground? And if it's a competition around, is Elon Musk a good person or a bad person? Is he evil or brilliant? We're using language to have that battle.
So just want to, because it's very interesting how you have the best way of telling the truth in the way that you talk. So I want to give an example. Let's say I will try to describe Elon Musk, and you're telling me if this is the maximum way to tell the truth. So Elon Musk did amazing things in his life. He inspired so many people. He is one of the richest person in the world, but he also made a lot of mistakes. He also is a human that has a family and has concerns and biases like everyone else. And so, you think this is a good way to elevate and say the truth, and also he is maximizing also. He's trying to maximize profit sometimes with his companies, and to say some of this negative stuff as well. So this is a balanced truth, you think? This is look,
I think it all depends on your purpose. So there's a famous philosopher, Ludwig Wittgenstein, who said, who talked about language games. Whenever we're using language, we're playing these different games. And, he said that, I don't know, he had examples like you can sit at a bench and look at a tree and ask, does this tree exist? Well, if you're two normal people, well, they'd say you're kind of crazy, right? But if you're philosophers, then that's okay. You can ask that question. And so your question about, should I balance, Elon Musk is good and amazing in these ways and sort of not in those other ways, the answer would be it depends on why you're talking about him. If, for example, you're writing a Wikipedia article about him, I think the answer is yes. You should go for try to get the whole balance. And so these are his achievements. He ran this company. He made this kind of profit. He invented that thing, and then here are these controversies and people are criticizing for this and that, and you get a balance. And that would be appropriate for a certain function, like, for example, writing a Wikipedia article. But if you are at the pub talking to your friends, oh man, he's amazing, and you'd want to explain to people why you're so inspired by Elon Musk, forget that the bad stuff. Just talk about the good stuff.
And when someone doesn't know about Elon Musk, you don't start, he's a family person, the bad stuff about him, and you want to explain to him who he is. So that's so your answer is depends on the context and what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly. I think most important is what are you trying to achieve? And it comes back to my view from the book that language is a form of action, that you have a goal when you use language. Representing reality or trying to just describe the truth, that's not really a goal. It always underlies a goal. What are we trying to do with this bit of language? Are we trying to become closer friend with that person? We're trying to help that person. Are we trying to convince that person to invest in my company? Are we trying to, just catch up with an old friend? The answer is, you said context, but I think context is a very vague word. And I think really much more specific would be, what are you trying to achieve through this way of talking? What is this? How do you want the other person to react? That's the kind of key.
Should I start thinking like that about my YouTube videos, what I'm trying to achieve?
Well, I think you already do. You have a very simple...
And not all, like a lot of times, like it will get you to a different place if you actually think what I'm trying to achieve with the way that I make the video, with the language that I use in the video, so it's a very interesting perspective to look at stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's fascinating what you're doing. And so in the book, actually a lot of the book at the end is about narrative and about how storytelling works. And I think in your YouTube videos, a lot of the time, so firstly, you said before that when you're talking to your collaborators about, planning a video, one of the things you want is for people to stay watch the whole thing to the end. And that is, I think, probably your top goal is so you are specifically thinking, that would be a perfect example. You're specifically thinking about, how do I influence these people's behavior? And I want them not to switch off, because at any second they could shut the video, watch a different one, get up, whatever. And you are very concretely thinking about, how do I influence their decision-making, that I make them not do this thing that they might do, which is switch off the video. So stick to the end. That's your purpose, your first number one goal, which you already think about carefully. Then you might have maybe secondary goals like, what's my brand, and do I want people to become better people, whatever, do I want them to be more sophisticated or more thoughtful, or, this depends on the brand that people have and different channels and all of that. So, when you ask that question, I think, again, it all depends on, I think you can reflect on what your goals might be. And it's worth thinking about narrative in this respect. Thinking about movies, for example. So take Hollywood films and novels. I talk in the book quite a bit about the basic structure of a script, a screenplay. And so they are built to get you to stay with the story. You get transported, you want to know what happens. You want to see how the hero gets, breaks out of the prison, or gets his girlfriend back, or finds his daughter, or whatever the film is about. You get captured in that. But any filmmaker will tell you that every film is about more than one thing. So it's going to be about some very surface thing, like, is James Bond going to actually survive, or is he going to be killed by the bad person? So is he going to get the gold back, or just some very sort of concrete objective? But then there's always another level. Does good win out over bad? Or can people, overcome their fears, or some very foundational questions? And so for you, if you're thinking of that, that's how I would think about it. The challenge of designing a YouTube video would be, okay, there's more than one goal. First is keep people watching to the end. Second, well, that's up to you. Who are you? Who do you want your audience to be? What do you want them to get out of their experience of watching your clips?
Well, okay. Before I sleep today, I will write my 10 goals that I want for people to. I want to have influence of people's behavior. What 10 goals I have to stay watch?
I think three is enough. 3 is enough.
3 is enough. Why not 10?
10's a lot. I mean, you couldn't keep track of them all. I think 3 is always a good number, but 2 or 3. But up to you. I think you're doing great.
But by the way, this is hard to it's hard to find people that they understand storytelling in a scientific way and with a different perspective. So I was so hooked all the time that we speak, but now that you were explaining the video stuff, I was like, wow, it's like a YouTuber friend now that we're discussing about YouTube stuff, which is cool. So I have it's time for me to say the second reason why you are here.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Drum roll. It's large language models, artificial intelligence. So you are a linguist. So I am curious to hear your thoughts on how these things work and what you think about this stuff.
Yeah, large language models are really quite amazing, and I'm certainly thinking a lot about them like everybody else. I started thinking about these things a few years ago when we first started to see in the news. We didn't have, ChatGPT and things like that, but there were some breakthroughs and people talking about that this was really something new, that computers could create language in a way that we've never seen before. And so I sort of have been monitoring it, but then, of course, this explosion just this year of these incredible resources, and now just everybody's talking about it. You can go to a kid's sports match and the parents are all talking about it. They have nothing to do with linguistics or computer science. So obviously it's a really big deal that the world is going to be changed by large language models in a very profound way. I think that I'm getting a little bit tired of the sort of maybe it's going to change soon, I hope, but, people freaking out about it, people kind of wanting to stop it, wanting to control it. I think that it's much more good could come out of it if it's used well. I often think about it in terms of using a calculator. When I was a kid, my mom was at university and she got this calculator, this big chunky thing, and you could do your sums, your statistics. And nobody was saying, oh, that's terrible. I don't know, maybe some people were, oh, you should do it with pencil and paper. Why you have that thing? You should use your brain and it's not good. I think people are talking a little bit like that these days with large language models, that they find it unacceptable that you would use. There's something morally bad about using ChatGPT to write a text or something. I think that is kind of weird, actually, and I sort of understand it. Maybe we can talk about that, come back to it. But there has to be like a cultural change where people stop worrying about the idea that we could get a machine to write content for us, like emails and reports and things like that. I actually think it's totally fine as long as you read what it's written. So I'll give you an example that in Australia we have a research council that scientists apply for money from the government to do their research. And when a proposal comes in, they send it to other scientists for evaluation, and the scientist sends an evaluation back to the council, and they make decisions. And this year, the council said, look, here, we got this report back here from another scientist talking about the value of this proposal. And if you read the text of the report, it's a cut and paste that the bottom part, it says, do you want me to regenerate another response? That, this person cut and paste the whole thing from GPT-3 and just stuck it in there. And it was they didn't obviously even look back. They used GPT-3. They didn't even read what it said. They just cut and paste. So that's terrible. That's just really lazy and stupid. And that's not what GPT-3 is going to be good for. GPT-3 is going to be good for saving that person a lot of time, but then they use this technology in a responsible way, and they actually go back and they start to put their own voice and their own agency and take responsibility for what is written in that text. So that's one whole sort of set of issues, I think, is that we are dealing with the fact that it's a brand new idea that you could have text getting generated for us in the same way that a calculator can do sums for us, right? We should be fine with it. We're just not ready for it, and it will take us a little while to get used to it. And then I guess the other big sort of question is, in what way is this computer actually using language? Is it speaking? Does it know language, right? That's, I think, maybe one of the questions one of the things you might have been asking with your question is, does this mean that computers have learned human language? I think that everyone would agree that in one sense the answer is definitely not. And that's because we know that the large language models don't work in the same way that humans do. How do we know that? Because you need to feed billions of words into these models to get them to learn how to speak in a fluent way. But a 4-year-old child can speak English fluently. It doesn't know the things that all are on the internet, but its language use is completely fluent just after 4 years, and they're not getting exposed to billions of words. They're getting exposed to much smaller number of words. So human language capacity operates using a completely different mechanism. Something in the human brain that we are trying to understand in linguistics, but it's not the same mechanism that the computers use. Okay, so we know that there's...
But if we go back to what your argument was, what language is, it seems that when I'm chatting with ChatGPT and I get a response, it seems like language to me, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
because
well,
it's trying to influence me in some way to have this answer rather than the other answer. This.
Yes, so let's unpack that. Okay, so we don't have to say that it's trying to influence you. Okay, but what we can say is you are being influenced by it. Okay, or you are allowing yourself to be influenced by it. So every interaction has two parties. Okay, so often, we can, language can work quite well with only one of those parties there. So for example, I don't know, you can talk to someone and they didn't actually get your message. Like maybe they were asleep or the letter, you wrote a letter and it got lost. You still feel that this was important that you said these things. Okay, so there's a sender but no receiver. The AI thinks the other way around. Okay, there's a receiver. You interpret the language that comes to you and you change your behavior based on that. So you are influenced by the language that comes from the model, but it's not trying to do anything. It's just a machine. Okay. Now, I think something very interesting comes up here that you could say then, Isn't that what all language is like? So when I talk to you now, you are actually making decisions about how to interpret my language. You are actually coming to conclusions about what I'm saying. Maybe I am a robot. It really doesn't matter, because you're the one who is actually actively deciding what I mean. You're the one who's actually interpreting my messages in a certain way. So there's something very active about the listener. Okay, so language, we think about language as, oh, well, I put the words here, I send them to you, you unpack them, they're there. That's not how language works. The listener is very active, right? So you can get these words from large language models, and of course they're words, they're part of language. I think nobody can deny that. But you inject all of this understanding into those words. You make choices and decisions about what to believe, what to think, as a result of those words being written there on your screen.
The same way, like I'm talking to you, exactly the same way. I think so.
But there are important differences. So one important difference is
consciousness.
Well, let's talk about that in a minute. I was going to say one important difference is the relationship that you have with that other agent. Okay, so you're talking, you're talking to me. I'm this human being. We arranged this conversation. We made a commitment to each other to be here at the time and place. You've asked me things mostly. I've asked you a little bit back. There's an arrangement that we've made, and we're sticking to this. And maybe one day in the future you might contact me again, etc. So we've actually met, and we have some kind of connection through this, and we're both kind of committed to it. The relationship you have with the computer is very different. And of course, you have different relationships with different humans. So you might have a certain relationship with a bus driver. You get on a bus, you say hello, you sit down, you get to your stop, you say thank you, you get off. That's it. Okay? So you use language to create these sometimes very simple, very distant relationships, other times very complex, very intimate relationships. And the way you interact with the large language model is just another kind of relationship, but it's very particular and kind of weird in the sense that it's not a person. You don't have any personal commitment to that entity, that thing that speaks to you on the screen. It's not your friend. It doesn't expect anything from you. You're not going to see it unless you turn it on. It's a completely asymmetrical relationship. So here's one reason why that's the case. Does ChatGPT ask you questions? No, right? It doesn't send you an email saying, hey, can you help me with this? Or I've got a question for you. No, you don't get, it's only you ask questions and then it responds. And there's not very many human relations that are like that. There might be some. So, for example, in the courtroom, the lawyer asks the questions, the witness has to answer them. And that's a very fixed. So it's a little bit like one of these very specific institutional relationships, like a lawyer and a witness, and very impersonal and very extractive. Okay, so that's my view of it. Is yes, it's language, and it's a very specific kind of relationship that you have to that agent, that machine, that artificial agent. But it's not a personal relationship in any kind of way, but it's definitely language.
It's not too personal yet.
No, that's true. And I think it probably is pretty personal already for some people. So I saw, so there's an app called Replica. I don't know if you know this app. There was a case just this week. I can't remember, but it was like a killing, or somebody had actually committed a murder, and this person was mentally ill, but they actually were saying that they had spoken to they kind of were married to this agent on this app, and the agent on the app said, yeah, you should go and murder this person. And that's a really interesting kind of borderline case, because that app is specifically designed for you to build up a relationship so that they get to know the machine, builds a model of who you are and what kinds of things you want to hear. And this is a good example of the real world effects coming out of that kind of a relationship, and why I think those kind of relationships are actually very problematic.
Now that you explained me that the reason of the basic of language is to influence other people, if large language models find the way that best influence humans, that's scary.
Well, they have already got that.
They will know exactly what time, what to say at what point, and when it's more developed, and they will have voice, and then it will have maybe a face or something like. Then it's like, and then you trust it and gets all your decisions, so it will be able to influence you in so many ways.
Yeah, but all humans are like that already. Our world is like that already. It's just that we're dealing with other humans. I mean, we allow other humans to influence us in all of these ways, and that's scary too. I just don't think that, I think there's a real overemphasis on the scariness of the artificial agents, because humans are already much more scary than that. That humans are already manipulating us in all these ways using language, and it's much more scary and dangerous than anything that a computer could do, in my opinion. Now, whether, what that means, I don't know. But I think at the moment, the key is to be mindful about the nature of the way the language is being used, the way that we're using this machine as a tool. And it's very challenging to us, because it raises ethical questions. People are often focusing on the ethics of the machine and so on. But it, I think, makes us look in the mirror a little bit and think, are we being manipulated in these scary ways by the real humans that we know? Are we manipulating other people in these ways? We haven't thought about that. So I think there's a lot to learn from large language models. And what I think is needed is just really careful, deep thought about these problems, and not kind of panic, moral panic. I just don't think it's going to be helpful.
Well, I see what you're saying, and I agree with you. But I think humans are not very clever to persuade yet. But maybe the machine will be a lot more efficient, and will have the right or it will have much more good or bad intentions or something. It will be much more accurate to the thing. So I'm not saying that I agree with you that for now is nowhere near for the afraid, and more excitement is suited here than being afraid.
I think what's important here is that humans take responsibility to a large extent. So you just said, it's scary because the machines will, learn our preferences, basically. But that's what they're designed to do. They're rewarded for acting in ways that we like. When we like the information they give us, the interaction stops. We've got what we needed. So we basically reward these systems with in certain kinds of ways. And the question is, we should ask ourselves is, are we rewarding them in the right kinds of ways? So I think we can look at the recent history of social media to kind of see that actually not really. So we scroll on Twitter, and we reward the algorithm. The algorithm knows, okay, if it shows us stuff that is extreme or shocking or whatever, it actually makes us want to look at it more, and that's bad because it's not manipulating us necessarily in a purposeful way, but it's just learning from what we prefer. right? So you can easily say, well, that's not the machine's fault. That's silly humans who are, making this choice to only watch shocking stuff. And so the response is to say, okay, therefore we really need to be mindful. We really need to step out of ourselves and look and see, is this how I want to be interacting with this agent? Is this how I want to be interacting with this application? And that's actually, to my mind, by far the hardest and most important piece of all of this. It's not there's no technical solution. There's no technological solution here. The solution has to be within the minds of the human beings who are using these systems. Can we respond responsibly to these systems? That's what we need to learn to be able to do.
So you're saying basically similar thing to what Elon Musk tried to say now with Twitter, like we need to not maximize profit or advertising your watch time in the channel. We need to unregretted time spent on our website, something along these lines. That we need to really think about the algorithms, how they're designed, what's the goal of that you have to the machine learning to optimize for?
I'm not sure. So I don't know the specific comments that you just cited that he was saying, but it sounds like you're talking about decisions about how to design algorithms, the decisions about how to design the social media platform. But think of it the other way around. So, you can think of all of social media as this giant, all the internet really as this giant kind of octopus, but with billions of arms, and every arm that right at the end of it, at the end of every tentacle is a smartphone, and that's somebody is attached to that, right? So one way you can say from inside the heart of this octopus, you can say, okay, well, what should I be pumping out to these to the end of my tentacles, And but the other way is to just flip that around and say, okay, I'm at the end of one of these tentacles with my face looking at one of these this little nozzle, this smartphone. I can control this interface using my brain. Okay, if I am mindful enough, if I can overcome. So one time when I was in on stage kind of a panel talking about some of these issues, somebody in the audience asked, who should be the gatekeeper of the, fact checking that comes through the internet? And I said, well, I don't think there's any technical solution that you could come up with that would prevent or that would guarantee, the quality of information that was coming through. But what you can do is every individual can be a gatekeeper. So you, as a receiver of whether it is shocking content that makes you not want to log off, or whether it's fake news or whatever, you can diffuse the problem at the terminal point of that tentacle by saying, okay, that's bullshit. Or, okay, I've had enough for the day. Or, okay, I'm going to override my natural inclination to watch more shocking stuff, or cat videos, or whatever the case may be. So that's what I think online literacy really has to be about. It's about understanding your own weaknesses as a consumer of language, as a respondent to language, as a consumer of imagery. If we can understand our own responses better, then we can actually take more responsibility ourselves, rather than trying to puzzle over technical solutions that would be administered by people like Elon Musk.
If I give you $1 trillion, how do you use them to have maximum impact in this world?
That's incredible. Yeah, I haven't thought very much about that type of a possibility. People in my world don't usually go around handing out trillions of dollars, but I think that.
You need to come to United States.
Okay, but look, I mean, I think, to my mind, I think the theme of what I was just talking about, which is really about some form of education, some form of enlightenment that would actually increase people's capacity, individuals' capacity to be able to somehow regulate their own behavior in how they consume the information that they're getting, and sort of step up a level and say, okay, I'm not seeing this in an objective way, or I'm not seeing the other possibilities. That's what true critical thinking is about. And I think somehow, I don't know the mechanism, I don't know the answer how you would actually create this, but if we could increase the world's kind of degree of enlightenment in some sense, the world's, the number of individuals in the world who are able to be more critical about what they're seeing, not critical in a negative sense, but in the sense we were talking about before, where we're allowing ourselves to be criticized to improve the quality of the information and the knowledge that we have. I mean, to me, that's the most important thing that we could possibly do in the world, because, a lot of the crazy stuff that's happening, a lot of the really negative stuff that's happening is it's down to human psychology, and it's down to some pretty basic kind of acts of decision making among humans that we're not really thinking very deeply. We're focusing on quite surface level questions of identity and without sort of really going that to deeper questions of what it means to be human and how to improve the world. So I feel like it's a very vague answer, but I feel like I don't think. Basically, my view is that the ills of the world are not going to be solved technically, with technical solutions. We're not going to, if we kind of put up satellites to deflect the sunlight, okay, that, might help a little bit in some respect. But these are not going to really stop the big problems that we have. Stopping the big problems that we have is really insisting on some of the foundational principles of enlightenment, which means really putting a value on true knowledge, and really putting a value on being self-critical and being creative and thinking about what do we need, rather than thinking, how can I defend what I already believe?
Well, I will not allow you to not tell me how you are going to use the money to do that.
Yeah, look, I wish I knew. That really would be worth $1 trillion if you actually knew how to do that. And I'm just talking about a dream. It's really just diabolically difficult to change people's minds. But you just have to keep working at it. And I think that there are people who believe that the world is getting worse, but then there are people who say, no, it's not. It's getting better. It's fantastic. So it's actually really hard to know. You have people like Steven Pinker or whatever saying, look, people are getting less superstitious. They're getting more curious. They're getting, there's all sorts of ways in which the world's getting better. And typically they come down to education. They come down to some really fundamental sort of basics about figuring out the tools that you need to apply, for example, the scientific method, that you have hypotheses, you test them. But at the very, very core of it is that you don't believe your eyes, and you don't just look for confirmation. You actually look for evidence, and you look to be disconfirmed. So more education is maybe a very lazy answer. But if I only had the answer to your $1 trillion question, maybe I would actually deserve to get $1 trillion for that. we'll see. If you're seriously offering it, well, let me know.
Well, let me get it first, and then I'll think about how I will allocate to you.
Great.
So I want to say that coming in this interview, language for people is not the most interesting thing ever, because they like what you're saying, that is like swimming in the water, and we undermine and we don't value the water in a way. So making this podcast, I understood how fundamental this language is. So I want to thank you for all your answers, your time, and everything. This was a blessing for me. I'm so
well.
grateful.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure talking to you. I much appreciate your questions and your interest. Thank you, Phidias.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Go and buy his books down in the description. Bye bye. We love you.